Tech executive James Holloway shocked everyone when he bid triple the asking price for the struggling Thompson family farm. But what happened next left the entire community of Willow Creek speechless. He handed the deed right back to Sarah Thompson and announced, "This is just the first step in saving America's family farms." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra, special for you. The late October wind swept across the rolling hills of Willow Creek as Sarah Thompson stood at the edge of her apple orchard, watching the auction company hammering signs into the soil her great-grandfather had first cultivated in 1918. Each metal stake seemed to drive deeper than just the earth. They pierced through generations of Thompson family history. Her great-grandfather had purchased these 175 acres with money saved from working in the coal mines, surviving both the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl without losing a single acre. Sarah's father had transformed it from traditional row crops to a thriving organic apple orchard and berry farm in the 1990s, seeing the future before most of his neighbors. Now, after 3 consecutive years of extreme weather, late frosts that killed the apple blossoms, followed by summer hailstorms that devastated what remained, the farm was drowning in debt with no lifeline in sight. Sarah ran her fingers over the rough bark of the oldest apple tree on the property, the one her grandfather claimed produced the sweetest fruit because its roots reached the deepest. "You can't rush good things," he used to tell her. "Deep roots take time, but they weather any storm." Yet all the deep roots in the world couldn't stand against the mountain of debt that had accumulated. "Mom, are they really going to take a home?" asked 8-year-old Ellie, her voice small as she approached through the fallen leaves. Sarah took a deep breath, tucking a strand of her auburn hair behind her ear before kneeling to meet her daughter's worried eyes. "I don't know, sweetheart," she answered honestly. "We're trying everything we can to keep it." She couldn't bring herself to say yes, even though the auction was scheduled for tomorrow morning. Her husband Mark joined them, his normally cheerful face worn with exhaustion after another day of making calls to banks, agricultural agencies, and potential investors, all leading nowhere. He placed a comforting hand on Sarah's shoulder, their wedding bands catching the late afternoon sunlight. The rings were about the only thing of value they hadn't sold or mortgaged in their desperate attempt to save the farm. "I made some hot apple cider," Mark said, offering them steaming mugs. A simple attempt at normalcy when nothing was normal anymore. $785,000 in debt, he continued, after Ellie had wandered off to check on the honeybee boxes at the orchard's edge. "Even if we sold every piece of equipment and all the remaining harvest, we wouldn't come close." Sarah nodded, her throat tight, as she glanced toward the white farmhouse where 4 generations of Thompsons had been born, where her children had taken their first steps across the wide plank pine floors, worn smooth by a century of family life. The farmhouse itself seemed to slump under the weight of impending loss, its maintenance deferred year after year as every spare dollar went into keeping the farm operational. The barn needed a new roof. The irrigation system required updating. The delivery truck was kept running through resourcefulness and spare parts salvaged from vehicles even older than itself. Word of the auction had spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. The local diner buzzed with solemn conversations. The feed store became an impromptu gathering place for farmers sharing similar stories of struggle. Tomorrow's auction wasn't just about the Thompson farm. It represented a way of life increasingly threatened across rural America. "Heard Westland Agribusiness is sending representatives," said Eleanor Guthrie, their neighbor for 25 years, who'd stopped by with a homemade casserole. "They've been buying up all the foreclosed properties in the Tri-County area, tearing down the old homesteads and converting everything to industrial-scale operations." Sarah felt her stomach knot. The thought of bulldozers tearing through the orchard her father had planted or demolishing the old maple tree with the tire swing where her children played made her physically ill. "We'll be at the auction tomorrow," Eleanor added, embracing Sarah warmly. "Most of the county will. Not that any of us can afford to buy it, but, well, we want to be there." That night, as Mark organized family photos and heirlooms into cardboard boxes, Sarah sat at the kitchen table where her family had shared meals for over a century. Spread before her were years of financial records, loan applications, and rejection letters. She traced the timeline of their downfall like a detective searching for clues, looking for the moment where everything went wrong. Was it the decision to go fully organic 7 years ago, just before certification costs increased? The investment in new varieties that took years to mature? The collapse of their largest wholesale customer during the pandemic? It wasn't one catastrophe, but a slow accumulation of challenges. Rising input costs, climate volatility, market consolidation, and price competition from imported produce. "Maybe we should have sold the east parcel when the Wilson family offered last year," Mark said quietly, setting a cup of tea beside her. Sarah shook her head. "And start the unraveling? That's how it always begins. Sell a piece here, a piece there, until there's nothing left worth saving." Their 15-year-old son, Lucas, appeared in the doorway, anger and helplessness etched across his young face. "This isn't fair. We work harder than anyone. Our produce is better than anything you can find in a supermarket. People should care where their food comes from." "Life isn't fair, son," Mark replied, though the words felt hollow. "It's about enduring the unfair." Lucas slammed his fist against the doorframe. "Westland doesn't care about this land. They'll destroy everything, pump it full of chemicals, and everyone will forget we were ever here." The boy's words hung in the air as he stormed off, the sound of his footsteps on the stairs echoing through the quiet house. Sarah fought back tears, knowing his anger masked the same pain they all felt. Lucas had grown up on this land, learning its rhythms and secrets. He could identify every apple variety by taste alone and knew which wildflowers attracted which pollinators. For years, he'd talked about studying agricultural science so he could bring new innovations back to the family farm. Now, that future was evaporating before his eyes. "I should go talk to him," Mark said, starting to rise. Sarah placed her hand on his. "Give him some time. We're all processing this in our own way." Later, as the house grew quiet and the children finally slept, Sarah stood at the kitchen window, gazing out at the moonlit orchard. The trees stood like sentinels, their bare branches etched against the night sky. How many storms had they weathered? How many seasons of bloom and harvest had they witnessed? And now they would likely outlast the Thompson family's stewardship, continuing under new owners who might see them only as assets on a balance sheet. Mark came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. They stood in silence, the weight of tomorrow's auction pressing down like a physical force. "Remember when we took over from your dad?" Mark asked softly. "How terrified we were." Sarah nodded, leaning back against his chest. They had been so young then, barely 30, with Lucas just a toddler and Ellie not yet born. Her father had been diagnosed with early Parkinson's, forcing an earlier transition than anyone had planned. The learning curve had been steep, the mistakes numerous, but they had persevered, gradually finding their footing and even introducing innovations that increased the farm's profitability. "We made it work then," Mark continued. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we'll make it work again, different but still together." Sarah turned in his arms, searching his face in the dim light. His eyes held the same steady reassurance they always had, even now, at what felt like the end of everything. She rested her head against his shoulder, drawing strength from his presence. "I keep thinking about my great-grandfather coming home from the mines each night, setting aside every extra. "A penny to buy this land," she whispered. "About my grandfather expanding during the post-war boom. My father taking the risk on organic when everyone said he was crazy. All that work, all that vision, ending with us." "Not ending," Mark corrected gently. "Changing form. What they built lives in Lucas and Ellie. Their work ethic, their connection to nature, their understanding of what matters." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That doesn't disappear, even if the deed to this land transfers to someone else. Sarah wanted to believe him, but the thought of leaving this place, the only real home she'd ever known, created a hollow ache beneath her ribs that no words could soothe. They eventually made their way upstairs, though neither expected much sleep on the eve of losing everything. Dawn arrived with a crimson sky, the kind old farmers said warned of storms to come. Sarah had been awake for hours, watching the gradual transformation of darkness into light. She dressed carefully, choosing clothes that were practical but dignified. Today would be hard enough without feeling shabby in front of the corporate representatives who would be bidding on her family's legacy. Downstairs, she found Lucas already at the kitchen table, dressed in his best flannel shirt and the jeans, without holes in the knees. His hair was combed neatly, his expression solemn beyond his years. Without speaking, he rose and poured her a cup of coffee, adding the precise amount of cream she preferred. "I'm sorry about last night," he said, sitting back down. "I shouldn't have stormed off like that." Sarah joined him at the table, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "You don't need to apologize for how you feel, Lucas. This is hard on all of us." Mark appeared with Ellie, who wore a dress she normally saved for church. Her small face was unnaturally serious, as if she understood that today required a certain formality. The family ate breakfast together, the conversation sparse but not uncomfortable. It was the quiet of people gathering strength for what lay ahead. "Whatever happens today," Sarah said finally, looking at each of them in turn, "we face it as a family, together." Three heads nodded in solemn agreement. Outside, the first vehicles could be heard arriving, tires crunching on the gravel. Drive. As dawn broke on auction day, vehicles began lining the gravel drive leading to the Thompson farm. The parking area beside the barn filled quickly. Local farmers in worn jackets and mud-spattered boots. Community members who'd known the Thompsons for generations. A few reporters from regional papers and suited representatives from agricultural corporations, checking tablets and speaking quietly into phones. Sarah stood on the porch, watching people gather on her land for what would likely be the last time. Mark squeezed her hand, offering silent support. Most faces in the crowd were familiar, people she'd gone to school with, worshipped alongside, at the community church, helped during their own hard times. But some stood out, corporate buyers with wireless earpieces and leather portfolios, assessing the property not as a home, but as a production unit on a spreadsheet. And at the edge of the crowd, partly shaded by an ancient maple tree, stood a tall man in a tailored but understated charcoal suit, leaning against a midnight blue electric SUV. Unlike the other corporate representatives who clustered together in small groups, he stood alone, observing everything with an intensity that made Sarah curious despite her grief. Eleanor Guthrie approached the porch, her husband Thomas beside her. "We brought coffee and donuts," Eleanor said, gesturing to the refreshment table they'd set up near the barn. "Thought folks might need something to warm them up." "You didn't have to do that," Sarah protested weakly. "Yes, we did," Thomas replied, firmly. "Thompsons have been bringing food to Guthrie family events for 3 generations. Figure it's our turn now." More neighbors arrived, each offering quiet words of support or simply a comforting touch on the arm. Pastor Dave from the community church came to stand beside them, not saying much, but providing a reassuring presence. Sarah was struck by how many people had shown up, far more than she'd expected. The Thompson farm had always been part of the community, hosting harvest festivals and school field trips, but she hadn't fully appreciated how deeply others valued their presence until this moment when it was about to be lost. The auctioneer, a man from 2 counties over who specialized in farm foreclosures, cleared his throat into a portable microphone. The crowd grew quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're here today for the public auction of the Thompson family farm, 175 acres with farmhouse, barn, equipment, and established organic orchard. Due to foreclosure proceedings, bidding will start at $425,000. Sarah closed her eyes. This was it, the end of everything her family had built, nurtured, and protected for over a century. In her pocket, she clutched her grandmother's locket, soon to be one of the only pieces of her heritage she'd be able to keep. $425,000. Do I have $425,000? The auctioneer's voice carried across the assembly. A hand went up from a woman in a navy pantsuit with the Westland Agribusiness logo on her tablet case. Sarah recognized her as Rebecca Mitchell, their regional acquisitions manager. $425,000 from the representative of Westland. Do I hear $450,000? Silence fell over the crowd. Eleanor Guthrie caught Sarah's eye and shook her head sadly. No one in the community had that kind of money. The local farmers were all facing similar struggles. None could afford to save a neighbor when they were one bad season away from their own auction. $450,000, the auctioneer repeated, looking around hopefully. When no one responded, he continued, $425,000 going once. Mark's hand tightened around Sarah's. She could feel him trembling slightly, though he maintained a stoic expression. For their children's sake, Ellie pressed closer to her mother's side, while Lucas stood rigid, jaw clenched in silent fury. Going twice. The last 20 years flashed through Sarah's mind. The day her father had handed over management of the farm to her and Mark, the spring afternoon they'd planted rare heirloom apple varieties with newborn Lucas strapped to her chest. The summer evenings when the family would gather on the porch to watch fireflies rise from the orchard like stars emerging from the trees. The auctioneer raised his gavel, ready to bring it down on the Thompson family's dreams. $750,000. The voice came from the back of the crowd. Heads turned to see who had spoken. It was the man by the electric SUV, still casually leaning against the maple tree. Now all eyes were on him. Rebecca Mitchell frowned, consulting her tablet quickly. $775,000, she counted without hesitation. $850,000, the stranger replied smoothly. A murmur ran through the crowd. The bid was already well above market value for farmland in the county, especially considering the weather-related challenges of recent years. The stranger stepped forward now, moving through the crowd with easy confidence. As he approached the front, Sarah could see him more clearly, perhaps mid-40s, with salt and pepper hair cut in a conservative style and eyes that seemed to evaluate everything with calculated precision. Rebecca Mitchell spoke urgently into her earpiece, her expression growing increasingly frustrated with whatever response she was receiving. $875,000, Mitchell finally said, her voice lacking its previous confidence. The stranger smiled slightly. Bid $2 million. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Even the auctioneer seemed taken aback, having to compose himself before speaking again. Or $2 million from the gentleman by the maple tree. Do I hear $1? $25 million. Rebecca Mitchell was now having what appeared to be a heated argument with someone through her earpiece. Finally, she shook her head at the auctioneer. Westland Agribusiness had reached its limit. What's 2 million going once? Going twice? The auctioneer paused, scanning the crowd for any last-minute bids. Finding none, he brought down his gavel with a sharp crack. Sold to the gentleman in the charcoal suit for $2 million. Sarah felt lightheaded. The farm had sold for far more than they owed the bank. After paying off their debts, there would be enough left to start over somewhere. Not with a farm, but perhaps a small business, or at least a decent home in town. It wasn't what she wanted, but it was more than she had dared to hope for this morning. Around them, the crowd buzzed with speculation. Who was this mysterious buyer? What did he plan to do with the Thompson farm? Was he a developer? A celebrity seeking a country retreat? Another agricultural corporation? The stranger was already signing paperwork with the auctioneer's assistant, his movements efficient and precise, as if he purchased foreclosed farms every day. Perhaps he did. Perhaps he was a developer with plans to turn the property into vacation, homes, or a corporate retreat. The thought made Sarah's stomach turn, despite the unexpectedly high sale price. "We should thank him," Mark suggested quietly. "Whatever his plans, he just gave us a fighting chance to start over." Sarah nodded reluctantly. The proper thing to do was express gratitude, even if it felt like thanking someone for making your execution less painful. As they approached, the stranger handed his pen back to the assistant and turned to face them. Up close, Sarah could see that his suit, while clearly expensive, was practical rather than flashy. The man's hands surprised her. They showed calluses and tiny scars, the hands of someone familiar with physical labor, despite his wealth. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," the stranger said, extending his hand. "James Holloway, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances." Mark shook his hand first, finding the grip firm but not overbearing. "Mr. Holloway, we wanted to thank you for the generous bid. The extra will help us relocate and start over." Holloway studied them for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Where will you go?" The question caught them off guard. They hadn't thought that far ahead, having been too focused on the loss itself rather than what came after. "My sister lives in Columbus," Sarah said. "We might start there until we figure things out." "And what will you do there? Not farming, I imagine." Sarah felt a flash of irritation at the personal questions. "No, not farming. Mark has experience in construction. I worked in accounting before we took over the farm from my father." Holloway nodded, looking past them to the orchard stretching out behind them. "Fourth generation on this land, I understand." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "How did you know that?" "I do my research, Mrs. Thompson." Holloway turned slightly to acknowledge Ellie and Lucas, who had joined their parents. "This must be a difficult day for all of you." Mark, always more diplomatic than Sarah, managed a polite smile. "As my wife said, your generous bid will make our transition easier. May I ask what your plans are for the farm?" Before Holloway could answer, Rebecca Mitchell approached, her expression sour. "Mr. Holloway, I didn't expect to see you here. Bit outside your usual territory, isn't it?" Holloway smiled, though the warmth didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Mitchell, Westland still using the same playbook, I see. Buy distressed properties, consolidate them, convert to chemical-intensive monoculture, and eliminate local jobs." Mitchell's face reddened. "We modernize outdated operations and create efficient food production systems. The company employs thousands." "Just not in the communities where you buy," Holloway replied. He turned back to the Thompsons, dismissing Mitchell entirely. "To answer your question, Mr. Thompson, I have several ideas for this property. Perhaps we could discuss them over coffee. The paperwork will take some time to process." Sarah hesitated, but Mark nodded. "We'd appreciate that, Mr. Holloway. Please, call me James." As they walked toward the farmhouse, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that there was something Holloway wasn't telling them. The man had just spent $1 or $2 million on their farm, almost certainly more than it was worth. As a pure business investment, either he was a terrible businessman or he had motivations beyond the obvious. The question was, what did James Holloway really want with their farm? Around them, the crowd began to disperse slowly, though many lingered, watching the Thompsons. And the mysterious buyer with undisguised curiosity, Eleanor Guthrie, caught Sarah's eye as they passed, raising her eyebrows in a silent question. Sarah gave a small shrug in response, equally confused by this unexpected turn of events. Inside the farmhouse, Sarah moved automatically to the kitchen, putting on coffee as she had for countless visitors over the years. The ritual provided a moment of normalcy amid the surreal circumstances. This morning, she had expected to be saying goodbye to these walls forever. Now, she was serving coffee to the man who had purchased her home for reasons she couldn't fathom. Lucas pulled Ellie into the living room, giving the adults space to talk, though Sarah knew her son well enough to suspect he would be listening from just beyond the doorway. Mark busied himself clearing the kitchen table of the breakfast dishes, his movements betraying his nervous energy. James Holloway sat at the kitchen table that had been in Sarah's family for generations, seeming at ease despite the circumstances, admiring the handcrafted furniture. "Black walnut," he noted, running a finger along the grain. "You don't see craftsmanship like this anymore." Sarah placed her mug down with deliberate control. "Mr. Holloway, James, I appreciate the small talk, but my family is wondering what you intend to do with our farm, and frankly, why you paid so much for it." Holloway nodded, unperturbed by her directness. "Fair enough." He took a measured sip of coffee. "First, let me tell you that I'm familiar with your farm situation because I've been tracking Westland's acquisitions across 7 states. "You're a competitor?" Mark asked. "No." Holloway's expression hardened briefly. "I'm more of an opposing force." Lucas, who had indeed been hovering near the doorway, stepped into the kitchen, unable to contain his curiosity. "What does that mean?" Holloway set down his mug and looked directly at Sarah. "The Thompson farm is the 13th agricultural property I've purchased this year. All were facing foreclosure. All were targets for corporate acquisition. You're buying up distressed farms as investments." Sarah's voice carried an edge of disgust. "Not exactly." Holloway reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. He placed it on the table and slid it toward Sarah. "This is the deed to your property, Mrs. Thompson. I've already signed it." Sarah stared at the paper without touching it. "I don't understand." "It's simple. I'm transferring ownership back to you." The kitchen fell absolutely silent. Mark's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. Lucas pushed away from the doorframe, taking a step forward in disbelief. Ellie, who had crept in behind her brother, let out a small gasp. Sarah slowly reached for the document, her hand trembling slightly. "This is some kind of joke." "I assure you it's not," Holloway replied calmly. "You'll notice there's a second document behind the deed. It's a loan agreement, much more favorable terms than your previous arrangement. 10-year term, fixed interest, at 1.5% with the first payment due in 18 months to give you time to stabilize." Sarah unfolded the papers, scanning the deed first. Her name was indeed listed as the owner, then the loan agreement. The amount was $600,000, half of what Holloway had paid at auction. "The interest barely covers inflation," Mark noted, reading. Over Sarah's shoulder, "You'd lose money on this deal." Holloway shrugged. "Not everything I do is about maximizing profit, Mr. Thompson. No one does this," Sarah said flatly. "No one pays nearly triple market value for a property just to loan it back to the previous owner at a loss." What's your angle? Holloway's composed expression faltered slightly, revealing something more personal beneath the businessman exterior. He looked out the kitchen window at the orchard beyond before answering. 25 years ago, my family lost our citrus grove in Florida, much like you're facing now. Weather disasters, rising costs, predatory loans. I was 16, the third generation to work that land. He paused, his gaze distant with memory. A multinational fruit corporation foreclosed. 2 weeks after we were forced out, my mother died from an aneurysm. The doctors called it a cerebrovascular accident, but everyone in town knew she died of a broken heart. She'd put everything into that grove. The kitchen was silent again, but with a different quality. The respectful quiet that follows shared pain. I promised myself that if I ever had the means, I'd help prevent other families from experiencing what mine did. 20 years in technology, then a startup that got acquired by Microsoft. I suddenly had more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. Lucas moved to the table, sitting down across from Holloway. So you just buy farms and give them back? Not exactly. I create partnerships. The loan gives the family breathing room, but they need to make the payments eventually. I also provide consulting on modernization, efficiency improvements, and alternative revenue streams. Weather-resistant crop varieties, Holloway continued, value-added products, direct-to-consumer marketing, agritourism, solar leasing on marginal lands. The family keeps their farm, the land stays in production, and rural communities remain intact. I found it's actually profitable in the long run, just not in the 3-month quarterly report timeframe that corporations obsess over. Sarah was still staring at the documents, disbelief etched on her weathered face. And what do you get out of this, besides feeling good about yourself? Mark shot her a look of reprimand, but Holloway smiled slightly. It's a fair question. Mrs. Thompson, I get 3 things. First, I get the satisfaction of thwarting companies like Westland, which I consider destructive to America's agricultural heritage and rural communities. Second, I get a modest but reliable return on investment over time. And third, his voice softened, I get to honor my mother's memory by preserving family farms like the one she loved. Ellie, who had been listening intently, piped up, so we don't have to leave, we can stay in our house. Holloway turned to her with a gentler expression than he'd shown thus far. That's right, if your parents agree to the arrangement. There must be a catch, Sarah insisted, still suspicious. The only catch is that I become a minority partner in your operation. I'll provide capital for improvements, marketing assistance, and connection to my network of family farms across the country. In return, I ask for quarterly reports, adherence to sustainable farming practices, and your participation in a cooperative marketing arrangement with other farms in my program. Mark reached for the papers, reading more carefully now. These terms are more than fair, but why us? Why our farm specifically? Holloway's eyes met Sarah's directly. Your farm sits at a strategic location for Westland's expansion plans. They've acquired 3 properties surrounding yours, and they need your water rights to complete their regional irrigation project. Without this farm, their entire county development strategy is compromised. Understanding dawned on Sarah's face. You're using us as a roadblock. I prefer to think of it as strategic leverage. Holloway smiled, this time with genuine warmth. But yes, your farm's location makes it particularly valuable both to them and to me. That said, I wouldn't offer this arrangement if I didn't believe in your capabilities as farmers. Your organic certification, rare apple varieties, and direct marketing efforts show innovation despite limited resources. You've really done your homework, Mark observed. I never make uninformed decisions, Mr. Thompson, Holloway gestured to the documents. "You don't need to decide right now. Take time to read everything carefully. Consult a lawyer if you wish. I'll pay for that consultation, by the way." Sarah looked from the papers to her family. Ellie was practically bouncing with excitement. Lucas's earlier hostility had transformed into cautious hope. Mark's eyes held a question, waiting for her lead. "If we agree," Sarah said slowly, "we'd still be in debt, still making payments." "Yes," Holloway acknowledged, "but manageable debt with realistic terms and with a partner invested in your success rather than your failure." As if sensing Sarah's continued hesitation, Holloway added, "Mrs. Thompson, do you know why farms matter? It's not just nostalgia or tradition. It's because families think in generations, not quarterly reports. Corporate farms extract maximum profit in minimum time, depleting soil and water resources. Family farmers preserve their land for their children and grandchildren." He gestured out the window toward the orchard. "Those trees took years to establish. The soil took millennia to develop. Corporate agriculture thinks in terms of 5-year plans. Family farms think in terms of inheritance and legacy." Sarah exhaled slowly, the weight of the decision pressing on her. "And what happens if we fail? If we can't make the payments even under these terms?" "Then we adjust the terms," Holloway replied simply. "I'm not in this to acquire your farm through the back door, Mrs. Thompson. I'm in this to keep family farms viable. If you're working in good faith, we'll find solutions." Mark reached over and placed his hand on Sarah's. "Sarah, this is a second chance, more than we dared hope for." Lucas leaned forward. "Mum, we can make this work. With capital for improvements, we could finally implement that rainwater harvesting system Dad designed." Sarah looked around the kitchen at the walls her great-grandfather had built, the floors her children had learned to walk on. She thought about the family cemetery on the West Hill, where generations of Thompsons rested beneath maple trees planted by their own hands. "What happens if I sign these papers right now?" Sarah asked, her voice steady. "Then you never stopped being the owner of this farm," Holloway replied. "The auction becomes a legal fiction that satisfied the bank. I become your partner and investor, and we begin planning for next season." Sarah picked up the pen Holloway had placed beside the documents. Her hand hovered over the signature line. "This seems too good to be true," she admitted. Holloway's expression grew serious. "I won't pretend there are no challenges ahead, Mrs. Thompson. Farming remains a difficult business. Climate change is making weather more unpredictable. Markets fluctuate. But I believe that with proper support and modern approaches balanced with traditional wisdom, family farms can not only survive, but thrive." Sarah felt the weight of her grandmother's locket in her pocket, the same locket that had been passed down for generations. She thought about the moment just an hour ago when she believed it would be one of the last remnants of her heritage she could keep. With a deep breath, she signed her name on both documents. Holloway extended his hand. "Welcome to the family. Farm Alliance, Mrs. Thompson." As they shook hands, Mark let out a laugh of disbelief. Lucas's face broke into a grin, and Ellie ran to hug her mother. Outside, the assembled crowd of neighbors and community members still lingered, unaware of the dramatic turn of events transpiring inside the farmhouse. "What do we tell everyone?" Mark asked, wiping moisture from his eyes. Holloway stood up. "I think it's time to make an announcement, don't you?" As they moved toward the door, Holloway paused. "By the way, there's one more thing. I've organized a community meeting at the town hall tomorrow evening. I'd like you all to attend. There are 9 other farms in this county facing similar situations. I think they'd benefit from hearing your story and learning about the alternatives to corporate acquisition." Sarah realized then that this wasn't just about saving one farm, it was about something much bigger. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" she asked. Holloway smiled. "It always is, Mrs. Thompson. It always is." The news spread through Willow Creek with extraordinary speed. By midday, everyone knew that James Holloway had purchased the Thompson farm only to return it to the family. Speculation ran wild about his motives, with theories ranging from tax benefits to governmental programs to secret environmental initiatives. As Sarah and Mark stood on their porch again, they were still processing the miracle that had occurred. "I keep expecting to wake up," Mark admitted, his arm around Sarah's shoulders as they watched the last visitors drive away. "Like this is some strange dream." Sarah nodded, leaning against him. "I know what you mean." Inside, Lucas was already at the kitchen table with a notebook, sketching irrigation improvements and making lists of equipment repairs that had been postponed for years. Ellie had reclaimed her bedroom, carefully unpacking the box of treasures she'd tearfully packed the night before. "Mr. Holloway said he'd be at the town hall at 7 tomorrow, Mark said. "Do you really think he plans to help other farmers in the county?" "I don't know what to think anymore," Sarah replied honestly. "This morning I thought we'd be sleeping in my sister's guest room tonight, trying to figure out where to go next. Now," she gestured to the orchard stretching out before them, "now I'm wondering if we might actually have a future here after all." The ringing of Sarah's phone interrupted their moment. It was Eleanor Guthrie. "Sarah, what in heaven's name is going on? Darlene at the market says you're keeping the farm, that this Holloway fellow gave it back to you." Sarah smiled, still hardly believing it herself. "It's complicated, Eleanor, but yes, we're staying. Holloway has some kind of program for distressed family farms. He's holding a meeting at the town hall tomorrow night. You should come." "Count on it," Eleanor responded emphatically. "And I'm bringing the Prestons. They got their foreclosure notice last week." After hanging up, Sarah scrolled through her messages. 22 texts from neighbors and friends, all asking variations of the same questions. What happened? Is it true? Who is Holloway? What's the catch? "Word travels fast," she remarked. "It's the most exciting thing to happen in Willow Creek since the tornado of 2019, Mark replied with a small smile, "and considerably less destructive." As evening fell, they moved inside, where Lucas was still working on his improvement plans. "Mom, look at this," he said excitedly, pointing to his sketch. "If we implement that rainwater harvesting system Dad designed 2 years ago, we could reduce irrigation costs by 30% while improving drought resilience. And Mr. Holloway mentioned solar panels on marginal land. We could use the North Slope where nothing grows well anyway." Sarah looked at her son's enthusiasm with a mixture of pride and caution. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Lucas. We still need to understand exactly what we're getting into with Holloway. But we're keeping the farm, right?" Lucas pressed. Sarah nodded. "Yes, we're keeping the farm." The simple statement filled the kitchen with a warmth that had been missing for months, the warmth of hope. The next morning, Sarah woke before dawn, as she had every day for decades. For a moment, the weight of impending loss pressed on her chest as it had for months. Then she remembered the farm was still theirs. She slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Mark, and made her way outside. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten as Sarah walked the perimeter of her property again. The dew-wet grass soaked her boots as she surveyed the orchard and fields with new eyes. Not the eyes of a woman saying goodbye, but of one planning for seasons to come. When she reached the family cemetery on the West Hill, Sarah stood before. The granite headstones, 4 generations of Thompsons, rested here beneath ancient maple trees. Her great-grandfather, grandfather, grandmother, father, all men and women who had worked this same soil, watched the same sunrises. "We didn't lose it," she said softly to the stones. "I don't know how, but we didn't lose it," Sarah whispered. To the gravestones, the morning breeze carrying her words across the peaceful hilltop. The rumble of an approaching vehicle broke the dawn stillness. A midnight blue electric SUV wound its way up the farm's gravel road, looking surprisingly at home among the weathered fence posts and apple trees. James Holloway had returned. Sarah met him near the equipment shed. "You're up early." "Farm hours," Holloway replied with a nod. "Some habits don't die, even after decades in technology." He gestured toward the cemetery on the hill. "Paying respects?" "Something like that," Sarah answered, studying the man who had inexplicably saved her family's heritage. In the clear morning light, Holloway looked less like a slick businessman and more like a man with purpose. "You didn't have to come back today. The papers are signed. Implementation is as important as intention, Mrs. Thompson. I found that following through immediately prevents complications." Holloway reached into his SUV and pulled out a laptop and several folders. "I've prepared some financial projections and improvement proposals I'd like to review with you before the town hall meeting tonight." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Right to business." "Time is the one resource we can't generate more of," Holloway replied, "and several of your neighbors are running out of it." They walked to the barn where Holloway set up his laptop on a weathered workbench. For the next 2 hours, he walked Sarah through a detailed assessment of Thompson Farms operations, highlighting inefficiencies, potential improvements, and new revenue sources. Sarah was impressed despite herself. The analysis was thorough and showed a deep understanding of both traditional and modern agricultural practices. This plan calls for transitioning an additional 30 acres to heirloom apple varieties over the next 3 years, Holloway noted, pointing to a color-coded map of the farm. The premium prices would offset the establishment costs by year 5. Heirloom varieties take years to reach full production, Sarah pointed out. "Yes, which is why we start now with a phased approach. Meanwhile, we implement improved pollinator habitat and direct marketing for your existing production to boost immediate revenue." Holloway clicked to another screen. Solar panels here, here, and here on the north slope would generate approximately $28,000 in annual revenue while taking only marginally productive land out of cultivation. Sarah leaned closer, her farmer's skepticism warring with the obvious expertise behind the proposals. "Where did you learn all this? You said you were in tech." Holloway's expression softened slightly. "After my mother died, I went to Cornell. On scholarship, studied agricultural economics alongside computer science. I wanted to understand why our grove failed. What could have been done differently?" His eyes hardened. "And I learned that most family farm failures aren't due to bad farming. They're due to bad systems, financing structures that don't account for agricultural cycles, market consolidation that depresses prices, land valuation that incentivizes development over production." Holloway's jaw tightened. "Systems designed by people who've never had soil under their fingernails." The barn door opened and Mark appeared with a thermos of coffee and a plate of muffins. "I thought you might need breakfast," he said, placing them on the workbench. Holloway thanked him with a nod. "Mr. Thompson, perfect timing. I was about to show your wife the community aspect of our program." He clicked to a new screen showing a website labeled Family Farm Alliance. "This is our cooperative marketing platform. Family farms in our network pool resources for distribution, processing, and direct-to-consumer sales. We've found that removing middlemen increases farm revenue by an average of 27%. Mark studied the screen. "These are all farms in your program?" "Yes, 58 operations across 8 states currently, each maintaining independent ownership but benefiting from shared resources and expertise." Holloway pointed to different sections of the website: direct shipping of specialty products, CSA programs, farm-to-table partnerships with restaurants, educational agritourism. As they continued reviewing the plans, Sarah began to see not Just a reprieve from disaster, but a pathway to genuine sustainability. The proposals weren't just about survival. They offered the possibility of a thriving farm that could support her family for generations to come. By mid-morning, Lucas had joined them, asking sharp questions that impressed even Holloway. The boy had clearly inherited his mother's agricultural instincts, but paired them with a younger generation's comfort with technology and innovation. These soil moisture sensors would connect to a central system? Lucas asked, pointing to a component. In the precision agriculture proposal? Yes, Holloway confirmed. Real-time data on moisture levels allows for targeted irrigation. We've seen water usage reduction of up to 55% on similar operations. We could integrate that with the rainwater harvesting system I've been designing, Lucas said excitedly, pulling out his sketches to show Holloway. As noon approached, the barn had transformed into an impromptu planning center with laptops, papers, and diagrams spread across every surface. The immediate crisis of losing the farm had been replaced by the energizing challenge of reimagining its future. There's one more thing we need to discuss before the town hall meeting, Holloway said, closing his laptop. Westland Agribusiness. Sarah's expression darkened. What about them? They won't be happy about this development. Rebecca Mitchell reports directly to the regional director, who reports to the board. They've invested heavily in their expansion strategy for this area, and your farm was a key acquisition target. What can they do? Mark asked, concern creeping into his voice. The farm is legally ours again. Legally, yes, but corporations like Westland have many ways to exert pressure. They may approach your neighbors with inflated offers to isolate your property. They could challenge water rights. They might even investigate our loan arrangement, looking for technicalities to exploit. You're saying they'll try to force us out another way, Sarah concluded. Holloway nodded grimly. It's a possibility we need to prepare for, which is why tonight's meeting is crucial. Individual farms are vulnerable. A community of farms working together presents a much more formidable obstacle. Safety in numbers, Lucas observed. Precisely. Holloway stood, gathering his materials. The more of your neighbors who join our program, the harder it becomes for Westland to execute their consolidation strategy. That's why I've prepared similar analyses for 9 other at-risk operations in the county. Sarah stared at him. You've already analyzed 9 other farms. When did you have time for that? Holloway's expression remained neutral. I've been monitoring Westland's acquisition pattern for 16 months, Mrs. Thompson. Your farm wasn't targeted by accident, and neither were the others. The implications of that statement hung in the air. This wasn't a spontaneous act of charity. James Holloway had been planning this intervention for over a year, methodically preparing to disrupt Westland's expansion. This is more than helping. Farmers for you, isn't it? Mark asked quietly. This is personal. For the first time, a flicker of raw emotion crossed Holloway's composed features. The company that foreclosed on my family's grove 25 years ago was called Sunbelt Agricultural Investments. 3 years later, they were acquired by Westland Agribusiness. The same people who destroyed my family are still destroying others. So yes, Mr. Thompson, it's personal. The revelation cast Holloway's mission in a new light. His program wasn't just about preserving family farms. It was about systematic opposition to the corporation that had devastated his own family. Tonight, Holloway continued, his composure restored, we're not just offering financial arrangements. We're offering an alternative vision for rural America, one where communities remain intact, where farming knowledge passes through generations, and where land is valued for more than its development potential. As Holloway prepared to leave, promising to return for the town hall meeting, Sarah walked him to his vehicle. You should have told us about your history with Westland from the beginning, she said. Holloway paused, hand on the SUV's door. Would it have made a difference, Mrs. Thompson? Would you have trusted me more or less, knowing I have a vendetta against the company threatening your farm? Sarah considered the question honestly. I'm not sure. That's why I let the proposal speak for itself first, Holloway replied. Judge me by my actions and the soundness of my plans, not by my motivations, even if those motivations include a healthy dose of justice long overdue. As the SUV disappeared down the gravel road, Sarah stood watching the dust settle. The day before, she had been a desperate woman facing the loss of everything. Now she was not just a farmer with a second chance, but potentially part of something much larger, a movement to preserve a way of life. The question was, how many of her neighbors would be willing to join them? The Willow Creek Community Center had never been so packed. The aging building with its 1980s paneling and flickering fluorescent lights typically hosted sparsely attended town meetings and the occasional retirement party. Tonight, however, cars filled the gravel parking lot and lined both sides of Main Street for 2 blocks. Word had spread rapidly about James Holloway and his unexpected intervention at the Thompson Farm auction. Farmers, business owners, and curious residents crowded the hall, the buzz of conversation creating a wall of sound as Sarah, Mark, and their children entered. They spotted Eleanor Guthrie waving from a row of folding chairs near the front, having saved seats for the now famous Thompson family. You're celebrities, Eleanor remarked as they sat down. Everyone's talking about what happened yesterday. It's all anyone can talk about at the diner. We're still trying to make sense of it ourselves, Sarah admitted. The Prestons joined. The moments later, George Preston leaning across Eleanor to speak to Sarah. Is it true, Sarah? This Holloway fellow actually gave you back your farm? It's more complicated than that, Sarah replied. He's created some kind of partnership arrangement. We still owe money, but the terms are manageable, and he's not just doing this for us. For others too? Martha Preston asked, hope evident in her voice. Like the Thompsons, the Prestons were facing foreclosure, their dairy operations struggling after 4 generations. Before Sarah could answer, the room quieted as James Holloway walked in, accompanied by a small team carrying laptops and presentation materials. He looked every bit the successful businessman in a tailored navy suit, but Sarah noticed he'd replaced his dress shoes with more practical boots, a small concession to the rural setting. Mayor Robert Jenkins called the meeting to order, his voice betraying his own curiosity about the evening's purpose. We're here tonight at the request of Mr. James Holloway, who I understand has an important presentation for our community. Mr. Holloway, the floor is yours. Holloway moved to the front with confident strides, commanding attention without visible effort. He surveyed the packed room before speaking. Thank you for coming tonight. I recognize many of you were at the Thompson Farm auction yesterday and witnessed something unexpected. He paused, making eye contact with faces throughout the crowd. I'm here tonight to explain not just what happened, but why and how it might relate to others in this community facing similar challenges. For the next 25 minutes, Holloway outlined the Family Farm Alliance using slides to illustrate its structure, goals, and achievements in other regions. He explained the partnership model, the sustainability requirements, and the cooperative marketing platform. The audience listened with growing interest as he detailed how modernization, diversification, and collective bargaining power could transform struggling operations into viable businesses. In the past 4 years, Holloway continued, our program has helped 112 family farms across 12 states avoid foreclosure and corporate acquisition. 97 of those are now operating profitably. The remaining 15 are on track to achieve profitability within the next 24 months. He clicked to a slide showing before and after photographs of a farm in Michigan. The Anderson family had farmed the same land for 135 years. When we partnered with them, they were weeks away from bankruptcy. Today, they supply specialty grains to craft breweries across 3 states and host agricultural education programs that generate additional revenue. Sarah watched the reactions of her neighbors. Skepticism remained on many faces, but it was increasingly mingled with interest and cautious hope. These were practical people, not easily swayed by flashy presentations, but they were also desperate for solutions. Now, Holloway said, his tone shifting, I want to address the question I know is on everyone's mind. Why am I doing this? What's my angle? The room grew even quieter. All eyes focused on this mysterious tech millionaire who had swooped into their community with promises that seemed too good to be true. Holloway set down his presentation remote and stepped away from his slides, moving closer to the audience. To answer that question, I need to tell you a story. My story. He took a deep breath, and for the first time, Sarah saw a crack in the man's composed exterior. I wasn't born into wealth. I grew up on a citrus grove in Florida, the 3rd generation to work that land. My mother, Diana Holloway, was the hardest working person I've ever known. She taught me how to graft trees before I could ride a bicycle. She showed me how to read the weather before I could read books. She instilled in me a love for the land that has never left, even decades after I left farming. Holloway paused, something raw flickering across his features. The audience remained silent, farmers and rural residents recognizing echoes of their own lives in his words. In 1998, after 3 years of struggle, our grove went under. A combination of citrus canker, falling prices, and 2 hurricanes in consecutive years left my mother with no options. She'd already remortgaged, already sold off equipment, already worked herself to the point of collapse, trying to save what her parents and grandparents had built. Sarah glanced at Mark, seeing her own pain reflected in Holloway's story. Around them, many others nodded in grim understanding. Sunbelt Agricultural Investments bought our property at auction for a fraction of its true value. Within a week, they had begun clearing groves that had stood for nearly a century. Holloway's voice remained steady, but his hands gripped the podium tightly. 14 days after we were forced to leave our home, my mother suffered a massive aneurysm while staying at my aunt's house. She died before the ambulance arrived. A sympathetic murmur ran through the crowd. Sarah saw several farmers remove their caps in respect. I was 16 years old. My college plans, my future, everything changed in that moment. I buried my mother beside generations of our family in a cemetery that now belonged to someone else. Holloway straightened, his momentary vulnerability replaced by controlled intensity. I promised myself then that if I ever had the means, I would prevent other families from experiencing what mine did. It took 20 years to fulfill that promise. He clicked to a new slide showing a corporate organizational chart. Sunbelt Agricultural Investments was acquired by Westland Agribusiness in 2001. The same company that foreclosed on my family's grove is now targeting yours. The same business model that destroyed my community is threatening yours. The revelation rippled through the audience. Rebecca Mitchell, the Westland representative from the auction, sat in the back row, her face darkening with each word. She spoke into her phone in urgent whispers. "This isn't just business for them," Holloway continued. "It's a systematic approach to land acquisition and rural transformation. They target vulnerable regions, acquire properties through foreclosure, consolidate operations, and eliminate local employment. They extract value from the land without contributing to the communities that stewarded it for generations." He clicked to another slide showing a map of Willow Creek County with several properties highlighted in red. These 10 farms have been identified as acquisition targets by Westland Agribusiness. 5 are currently in foreclosure proceedings. 3 more are less than 6 months from that point. Gasps and whispers spread as people recognized their own farms or those of their neighbors on the map. The Prestons clutched each other's hands tightly. "Now," Holloway said, his voice gaining strength, "let me be absolutely clear about my motivations. Yes, I want to help preserve family farms and rural communities. Yes, I believe in the economic viability of modernized, small-scale agriculture, but I also want to stop Westland agribusiness. I want to break their acquisition strategy. I want to prove that their model of corporate consolidation isn't the inevitable future of American agriculture." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Is it personal? Absolutely. Is it also good business and the right thing to do? I believe so. From the back of the room, Rebecca Mitchell stood up. "This is slander against a legitimate business, Mr. Holloway. Westland agribusiness revitalizes struggling agricultural regions and creates efficient operations that feed America." Holloway didn't even turn to look at her. "They eliminate 4 jobs for everyone they create. They extract wealth from rural communities and funnel it to urban shareholders. And they destroy something that can never be replaced, the generational knowledge of farmers who know their land intimately." Mitchell's face flushed. "You're manipulating these people with emotional appeals and unrealistic promises." Now Holloway turned, fixing Mitchell with a steady gaze. "The difference between us, Ms. Mitchell, is that I've stood in their shoes. I've watched everything my family built slip away. I felt the particular anguish that comes from losing not just a business, but a heritage." He turned back to the audience. "I'm not here to vilify Westland or any corporate agricultural entity. They operate within the system as it exists. I'm here to offer an alternative, a different vision for rural America than the one they're selling." Holloway moved away from the podium, walking closer to the front row where the Thompsons and Prestons sat. "I can help some of you save your farms. Not all of you, not immediately. But if enough of you join together, we can create something powerful enough to resist consolidation. Something that preserves what matters while adapting to changing realities." Martha Preston raised her hand, her voice wavering slightly. "Our bank says we have until the end of next month before they begin foreclosure proceedings. Is that too late?" Holloway's expression softened. "No, Mrs. Preston, it's not too late. In fact, my team has already prepared a preliminary assessment of your operation. We can meet tomorrow if you'd like." George Preston looked stunned. "You've already analyzed our farm. As I said earlier, I've identified 10 operations in this county that Westland has targeted. Yours is one of them." Holloway gestured to his team at the side of the room. "We've prepared detailed proposals for each of these properties with specific recommendations tailored to your individual situations." The room erupted in conversation, a mixture of hope and disbelief washing through the crowd. Mayor Jenkins had to bang his gavel several times to restore order. "Mr. Holloway," he said, once the room quieted, "this is certainly an extraordinary offer, but I think many of us are wondering what happens when you leave. Will these farms truly be sustainable, or will they become dependent on your continued support?" It was a good question, and Sarah found herself holding her breath for the answer. Holloway had presented an impressive plan, but long-term viability was what mattered most. "An excellent question, Mayor Jenkins," Holloway acknowledged. "The goal isn't dependence, it's transformation. My financial support provides breathing room for necessary changes. The cooperative structure creates ongoing resilience. Within 5 years, these farms should be able to stand entirely on their own, connected to markets and resources that ensure their continuation." He gestured to Sarah. "Mrs. Thompson, would you mind joining me for a moment?" Surprised, Sarah stood and made her way to the front, uncomfortable with the sudden attention. Sarah Thompson represents exactly what this program is about, Holloway said, placing a hand on her shoulder. Not charity, not dependence, but partnership and transformation. Already today, she and her son have begun planning improvements that will make their operation more efficient, more sustainable, and more profitable. Sarah found herself nodding, then realized everyone was waiting for her to speak. She cleared her throat awkwardly. 24 hours ago, I thought I'd lost everything, she began hesitantly. I thought my family would be the ones to break the chain of 4 generations. I thought I'd failed my ancestors and my children. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I don't know if Mr. Holloway's program will work for everyone, but I can tell you that for the first time in years, I'm thinking about planting for the future instead of just surviving until next month. And that change, that shift from desperation to possibility, that alone is worth something. As Sarah returned to her seat, a slow wave of applause spread through the room. Holloway waited for it to subside before continuing. I'll be in Willow Creek for the next 10 days. My team will be available to meet with any interested farm owners individually. We'll provide detailed assessments and proposals with no obligation. He looked around the room one final time. This is your community. These are your farms. I'm simply offering tools and resources to help you keep them that way. With that, the formal presentation concluded, but no one left. For the next 3 hours, farmers lined up to speak with Holloway and his team, clutching financial documents and asking pointed questions about how the program might apply to their specific situations. Sarah watched from the side of the room, still processing the evening's revelations. James Holloway wasn't just a wealthy philanthropist with a pet project. He was a man on a mission born from personal tragedy and fueled by a determination to prevent others from experiencing the same fate. What do you think? Mark asked softly, joining her by the wall. I think, Sarah replied slowly, that we've been given more than just our farm back. We've been given a purpose. As they prepared to leave, Rebecca Mitchell approached them, her expression tightly controlled. The Thompson family, congratulations on your good fortune. Thank you, Mark replied cautiously. Mitchell's professional smile didn't reach her eyes. Westland will be watching this situation closely, Mrs. Thompson. Mr. Holloway may have grand ideas, but remember, he doesn't have to live here. You do. The implied threat hung in the air as Mitchell walked away, leaving Sarah with the distinct feeling that saving the farm might have been the easy part. The real challenge was just beginning. Dawn broke over Willow Creek County with a different energy than the day before. As Sarah Thompson walked her orchard in the early morning light, the weight that had pressed on her shoulders for months felt lighter. Not gone. The challenges ahead remained formidable, but transformed into something she could bear. From the hillside overlooking the eastern fields, she could see 3 neighboring farms, the Guthries to the north, the Wilsons to the east, and beyond them, the Preston dairy operation. All 3 families had attended last night's meeting at the community center. All 3 had scheduled private consultations with James Holloway and his team. The sound of tires on gravel drew Sarah's attention to the farm's access road. Holloway's midnight blue SUV was approaching, followed by 2 more vehicles, a silver hybrid sedan and a white truck with equipment in the bed. It was barely 6:30 a.m. Early riser, Sarah commented when Holloway stepped out of his vehicle. Farm habits die hard, Holloway replied. I thought we could begin the assessment before the day heats up. The people emerging from the other vehicles were clearly specialists of some kind. One carried soil sampling equipment, another had sophisticated mapping technology, and a third unloaded what appeared to be a compact drone. I've brought some experts to help evaluate your operation more thoroughly, Holloway explained, gesturing to the team Dr. Patel is an agricultural soil scientist from Michigan State. Ms. Rodriguez specializes in water management systems. Mr. Chen is our technology integration specialist. Sarah raised her eyebrows. This seems like a lot of firepower for one farm. The Thompson property is our anchor in this region, Holloway said matter-of-factly. Your success will demonstrate what's possible to your neighbors. We need to get it right. Over breakfast, Mark served the assessment team coffee and homemade apple muffins, while Holloway outlined the day's activities. We'll conduct comprehensive soil analysis across the property, map microclimates and drainage patterns, evaluate existing infrastructure, and identify optimal locations for potential improvements, he explained. By this evening, we'll have the data needed to finalize your specific development plan. Lucas, who had been listening intently, couldn't contain his enthusiasm. Can I follow the team? I want to learn how they do the assessments. Holloway nodded approvingly. Mr. Chen could use an assistant with your knowledge of the property. I'm sure he'd welcome the help. As the specialists dispersed across the farm, with Lucas eagerly trailing Mr. Chen, Holloway remained at the kitchen table with Sarah and Mark. Ellie had already left for school, though not before extracting a promise that she could participate in the farm planning when she returned. While the team works, I'd like to discuss something broader with you both, Holloway said, his tone shifting to something more serious. Something that goes beyond your individual operation. Sarah and Mark exchanged glances. What do you have in mind? Mark asked. Holloway pulled out his tablet and opened a map of Willow Creek County. Last night, I introduced the concept of the Family Farm Alliance as it exists today. But what I envision for this region is something more comprehensive, a pilot program that could become a model for rural revitalization nationwide. He expanded the map to show the entire county with various properties highlighted in different colors. The 10 farms we've identified as Westland targets form a connected agricultural ecosystem. Together, they control critical water rights, include diverse soil types and microclimates, and represent a complete spectrum of agricultural activities from fruit production to dairy to specialty crops. You're talking about treating multiple independent farms as a single system, Sarah asked, clearly intrigued. Exactly, Holloway's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. Not in terms of ownership, each farm remains independent, but in terms of coordination, resource sharing, and market approach. Imagine integrated crop rotations across properties, shared equipment that would be too expensive for individual farms, processing facilities owned cooperatively by producers. He swiped to another screen showing a complex flowchart. The current agribusiness model is vertical integration. Corporations control everything from seed to shelf. What I'm proposing is horizontal integration among independent producers to achieve similar efficiencies while preserving individual ownership and local control. Mark leaned forward, studying the diagrams. Despite his initial skepticism, he found himself drawn to the vision Holloway was presenting. This would require unprecedented cooperation among farmers who've always operated independently. True, Holloway acknowledged, and that's the challenge. Farmers are by nature independent operators, but the alternative is watching your neighbors' farms fall one by one to corporate acquisition until your own operation becomes unsustainable in isolation. Sarah, always the practical one, pointed to the map. Some of these farms produce competing crops. Others have long-standing disagreements over water rights or property boundaries. Getting everyone to cooperate won't be easy. Holloway nodded, acknowledging the reality of rural dynamics, which is why the Thompson farm is so important. You're respected in this community. Your participation gives credibility to the whole concept. Sarah sat back, the implication of Holloway's words sinking in. So we're not just saving our farm. You want us to help lead this transformation? Precisely. Holloway fixed Sarah with an earnest gaze. The Family Farm Alliance has typically worked with individual operations. What I'm proposing in Willow Creek County is the next evolution, a rural agricultural cooperative that functions as a counterweight to corporate consolidation. He pulled out a folder and laid several documents on the table. These are the preliminary agreements for farms joining the cooperative. Each operation receives individual financial support tailored to their situation, plus access to shared resources and markets. In return, they commit to sustainable practices, participation in cooperative decisions, and gradual implementation of modernization plans. Sarah picked up one of the documents, scanning it with the careful attention she'd always given to farm contracts. This is remarkably favorable to the farmers, she observed, because thriving farms benefit everyone, Holloway replied. My investment generates returns through efficiency gains and premium market access, not by extracting value from struggling producers. Mark studied Holloway's face, still trying to fully understand the man's motivations. This goes well beyond helping a few farms or even getting back at Westland. You're talking about restructuring rural agriculture. I am. Holloway didn't try to downplay the ambition of his vision. For decades, we've been told that consolidation is inevitable, that family farms are relics of the past, that rural communities must decline as agriculture industrializes. I reject that narrative. I believe there's a third path that combines the best of traditional farming wisdom with modern technology and cooperative structures. Through the kitchen window, Sarah could see Lucas walking the fields with Mr. Chen. The two of them engaged in animated conversation as they set up the mapping drone. Her son, who had been so angry and hopeless just days ago, was now enthusiastically embracing the future of the family farm. If other farmers joined this cooperative, Sarah asked, how would decisions be made? Who would control the direction? A council elected by member farms would govern day-to-day operations, Holloway explained. Major decisions would require a 2/3 majority vote, with votes weighted by acreage contribution. My organization would hold a minority position. By design, we provide resources and expertise, but local farmers maintain control. Mark, still reading through the documents, looked up. This mentions educational programs and tourism components. That's quite different from traditional farming. Holloway nodded. Diversification is key to sustainability. Many consumers today want connection to their food sources, farm experiences, agricultural education. Even agritourism can provide significant supplemental income with minimal disruption to primary operations. He turned to a page showing financial projections. The Thompson farm could generate an additional $35,000 to $60,000 annually through educational programs alone, heritage apple tastings, sustainable farming demonstrations, school field trips, seasonal festivals, all celebrating the agricultural traditions of this region while creating new revenue streams. Sarah had never considered her daily work as something tourists would pay to experience, but she had to admit the idea had merit. City people were increasingly disconnected from the sources of their food. Perhaps there was value in bridging that gap. What about processing facilities? Mark asked, thinking practically. Small producers can't compete with big operations in getting products to market. Holloway smiled, clearly pleased by the question. That's where cooperative scale becomes transformative. Together, the farms in this county have sufficient volume to justify investment in local processing facilities. A small cider mill, a dairy creamery, even a commercial kitchen for value-added products. He pointed to different locations on the county map. We've identified potential sites for these facilities. strategically located to serve multiple operations. Each would be cooperatively owned by the participating farms, with my organization providing initial capital and technical support. The concept was beginning to take shape in Sarah's mind, not just her farm operating in isolation, but as part of an interconnected network of independent producers working together to achieve the efficiencies typically reserved for corporate giants. "And how does Westland agribusiness fit into all this?" Sarah asked, recalling Rebecca Mitchell's veiled threat from the night before. Holloway's expression hardened slightly. "They won't surrender their expansion plans easily. They've invested heavily in this region, acquiring properties and water rights according to a very specific strategy. Our cooperative directly challenges that strategy." "Will they try to stop us?" Mark asked quietly. "They'll certainly try to undermine the effort," Holloway acknowledged. "They may approach struggling farmers with seemingly generous offers to create divisions. They might challenge water rights or easements. They could even attempt to influence local regulations to hinder cooperative activities." He closed his tablet, his expression resolute. "That's why we move quickly and decisively. Each farm we bring into the cooperative strengthens our position. By the time Westland fully realizes what we're building, it should be too late for them to stop it." The distant sound of a vehicle approaching drew their attention. Through the window, they could see Eleanor Guthrie's truck coming up the drive, followed by the Prestons' weathered pickup. "I wasn't expecting visitors," Sarah remarked, standing to greet their neighbors. "I may have suggested they stop by this morning," Holloway admitted with a slight smile. "The Guthrie's berry production could complement your apple operation perfectly, and the Prestons' dairy herd would benefit from coordinated feed production with both your operations." Sarah realized that Holloway was already thinking several steps ahead, mentally arranging the farms of Willow Creek County into an integrated system where each operation strengthened the others. As they stepped onto the porch to greet their neighbors, Sarah was struck by the energy in Eleanor Guthrie's normally reserved demeanor. The older farmer bounded from her truck with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. "Sarah, we couldn't wait until our official meeting this afternoon," Eleanor called out. "Martha Preston called us at dawn after running the preliminary numbers Holloway's team prepared. It's remarkable what might be possible if we work together." George Preston, typically the most cautious farmer in the county, nodded vigorously. "They showed us how coordinating our milk production with your fruit processing waste could reduce our feed costs by 24%, while providing you with a reliable composting partner." Sarah glanced at Holloway, who remained silent, allowing the farmers to share their excitement without interference. The strategy was clever. Let the ideas spread farmer to farmer, building organic momentum within the community. "We've been neighbors for 20 years, Eleanor continued, "but we've never really coordinated our operations, always competed for the same markets, dealt with the same middlemen separately." Martha Preston, a practical woman not given to flights of fancy, pulled a notebook from her purse. "If our farms joined forces," Martha continued, "just our 3 operations to start, we could justify investments in equipment none of us could afford individually. Advanced irrigation systems, cold storage facilities, and shared distribution channels. That's what convinced me," George added. "The leverage we'd have together versus selling individually. One small farm can't negotiate with distributors, but 10 farms marketing as a unit changes the entire conversation." As the neighbors continued sharing insights from their preliminary consultations with Holloway's team, Sarah felt the vision expanding before her eyes. This wasn't just about saving individual farms from foreclosure. It was about reimagining the entire structure of rural agriculture, creating a third path between corporate consolidation and isolated family farms struggling alone. Later, as the specialists continued their assessment of the Thompson property and the neighbors huddled with Holloway over maps and projections, Mark joined Sarah by the old maple tree that had stood watch over the farm for generations. "What? And do you think," he asked softly, "is this real? Can it actually work?" Sarah watched her son flying the mapping drone over the North Orchard, his face alight with purpose. She observed Eleanor Guthrie and George Preston, people she'd known her entire life, engaged in animated discussion about cooperative possibilities they'd never before considered. "I think," she said slowly, "that we've been fighting a losing battle for years because we've been fighting alone. Maybe together we actually stand a chance." As the morning sun climbed higher, casting new light across the orchard her ancestors had tilled, Sarah began to see her land not just as an isolated island to be defended, but as part of something larger, a network of interdependent farms that might collectively rewrite the future of rural America. The vision was expanding beyond anything she could have imagined when she stood watching auction signs being hammered into her soil. 3 months after the auction that nearly ended the Thompson family's farming legacy, Willow Creek County had transformed. The Family Farm Alliance sign at the entrance to the Thompson property gleamed in the summer sun, matching similar signs that now stood at 9 other farms across the county. What had begun as a desperate last stand had blossomed into a movement. Sarah Thompson stood at the edge of her apple orchard, surveying the new drip irrigation system that snaked through the rows. The system had reduced water usage by nearly 60%, while improving fruit quality exactly as Holloway's experts had predicted. Across the property, solar panels on the north slope generated power that not only supplied the farm's needs, but fed excess electricity back into the grid, creating a new revenue stream. "Quite a change from 3 months ago," came Holloway's voice as he approached from the direction of the barn, where a team was installing upgraded cold storage facilities. Sarah nodded, still sometimes disbelieving the transformation. "I wouldn't have thought it possible." "The Thompson farm market opened yesterday in town," Holloway commented. "Mark tells me they sold out of everything by noon." The market had been Mark's project, a retail outlet in Willow Creek where the cooperative's farms could sell directly to local consumers. Fresh dairy from the Prestons, berries from the Guthries, honey from the Jacksons, and apple products from the Thompsons, all under one roof, with the profits flowing directly back to the producers. "People are driving in from 2 counties away," Sarah acknowledged. "Turns out folks are willing to pay premium prices when they know exactly where their food comes from." Holloway surveyed the property with evident satisfaction. "And the orchard. Tours are booked solid through September." Sarah still found it remarkable that people would pay to learn about farming practices she'd taken for granted her entire life. Lucas has turned into quite the tour guide. He's got a presentation on heritage apple varieties that has the culinary tourists enthralled. The progress was undeniable. The initial investments from Holloway's organization had catalyzed improvements across all participating farms. Shared equipment reduced costs, coordinated production increased efficiency, direct-to-consumer sales channels improved margins. Every financial projection Holloway had presented was proving accurate, sometimes conservative, but success had not come without opposition. "Any more visits from Mitchell or her associates?" Holloway asked, his tone shifting to something more serious. Sarah's expression darkened. "Not directly, but we've heard they've been approaching the holdouts with increasingly generous offers." 3 farms in the county had declined to join the cooperative, skeptical of the new approach or unwilling to commit to the sustainability practices required. Westland Agribusiness had focused their attention on these operations, offering prices well above market value to establish footholds in the region. "They're getting desperate," Holloway observed. Their regional strategy can't succeed without controlling key water access points. As long as the cooperative farms hold those rights collectively, Westland's consolidation plan is blocked. A truck appeared on the access road, George Preston's vehicle moving at unusual speed. The dairy farmer barely waited for the dust to settle before jumping out, his face flushed with urgency. "They've done it!" George called out, striding toward them. Westland just filed a legal challenge to the cooperative's water-sharing agreement. Their lawyers are claiming our arrangement violates historical water rights allocations. Sarah and Holloway exchanged grim looks. They had anticipated legal challenges, but not so soon. They're also pushing the county commissioners to revise zoning regulations, George continued, waving a document. New restrictions on commercial activities in agricultural zones that would effectively shut down the farm market, the educational programs, everything we've built. Holloway accepted the paper, scanning it quickly. They're moving faster than expected. Mitchell must have convinced her superiors that we pose a serious threat. "What do we do?" Sarah asked. "We fight," Holloway replied simply. "My legal team is already preparing responses to potential challenges. We'll request a public hearing on any proposed zoning changes, and we'll make sure every resident of this county understands exactly what Westland is trying to do." George nodded grimly. "The county meeting is scheduled for next Thursday. Westland's flying in their regional director." "Then we'll be ready," Holloway assured him. This was always going to be a battle for more than just land. As George departed to spread the word to other cooperative members, Holloway turned to Sarah. "This is the critical moment, Mrs. Thompson. Westland has realized we're not just saving individual farms. We're creating a viable alternative to their entire business model. If we succeed here, it could spread to other regions. They can't allow that." Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders again, but differently now. 3 months ago, she had been fighting alone to save her family's heritage. Now she stood at the center of a community's battle for its future. "When I agreed to your partnership," Sarah said slowly, "I thought we were just saving my farm. I never imagined we'd be taking on a corporation like Westland." Holloway's expression was resolute. "Sometimes the most important battles find us, rather than the other way around. The question is, are you prepared to stand your ground?" Sarah looked out over her orchard, then beyond to the neighboring farms that had joined the cooperative. She thought about the changes already taking root, not just in agricultural practices, but in the community itself. For the first time in decades, young people were considering futures in farming. Local businesses were seeing increased activity. The school had even added an agricultural science program, with Lucas serving as a student advisor. "I've spent my life standing my ground," Sarah replied with quiet determination. "The difference now is I'm not standing alone." 1 year later, the Harvest Festival at the Thompson farm drew visitors from across 5 states. Colorful tents dotted the orchard, offering produce, crafts, and educational exhibits from all 10 farms now participating in the Willow Creek Agricultural Cooperative. Children laughed as they navigated the apple maze Lucas had designed, while parents sampled artisanal products at the various booths. The scent of apple cider and cinnamon filled the air, mingling with the music from a local bluegrass band playing on a small stage near the barn. Sarah stood beside the cider press, watching as Mark led a demonstration using apples sourced entirely from cooperative farms. Nearby, Ellie guided a group of school children through an interactive exhibit on pollinator conservation. James Holloway joined her, looking satisfied as he surveyed the scene. "Quite different from last year's auction," he observed. Sarah nodded, still sometimes amazed by the transformation. "The cooperative's first-year results exceeded even your projections." It was true. The combined financial performance of the member farms had improved by 52% over the previous year. New markets had opened, efficiency gains had reduced costs. Direct-to-consumer channels had increased margins. Most importantly, not a single member farm remained in danger of foreclosure. "And Westland?" Sarah asked. "Still present, still purchasing land where they can," Holloway acknowledged. "But their regional consolidation strategy has been effectively blocked. They've had to adapt their approach, even implementing some of our cooperative concepts in their own operations." Sarah smiled at that. "Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery." "Something like that." Holloway checked his watch. "I should prepare for my presentation. The governors arrived, and several state representatives." The Willow Creek model had attracted attention far beyond the county. Agricultural officials, policymakers, and farmers from other regions had come to observe what many were calling a potential blueprint for rural revitalization nationwide. Before Holloway could leave, Sarah placed a hand on his arm. "I never properly thanked you, not just for saving my farm, but for everything that's come after." Holloway's typically composed expression softened. "You don't need to thank me, Mrs. Thompson. This wasn't charity, it was partnership, and what you and your neighbors have built here goes far beyond what I initially envisioned." He gestured to where several young farmers were demonstrating drone technology for crop monitoring. A year ago, most of them had been planning to leave agriculture entirely. Now they represented its future. Sarah looked out over her land, the same soil her ancestors had worked, now thriving under new approaches that honored old wisdom. She watched her son confidently explaining heirloom apple varieties to university researchers. She observed her daughter leading children through hands-on science activities, connecting them to the sources of their food. "My great-grandfather used to say farming isn't just a business, it's a way of life," Sarah reflected. "For a while, I thought that way of life was doomed, that corporations and consolidation were inevitable. Now I'm not so sure." Holloway nodded thoughtfully. "The battle isn't over. The forces driving consolidation remain powerful, but for the first time in decades, family farms have a viable alternative, a third path that combines independence with cooperation, tradition with innovation." In the distance, a tour group was gathering for the next round of orchard visits. Sarah recognized farmers from neighboring counties who had come to learn about potentially joining or forming their own cooperatives. "That's the real victory," Holloway concluded. "Not just saving individual farms, but creating a model that can spread, that can be adapted by others facing similar challenges." As Holloway departed to give his presentation, Sarah remained by, the cider press, taking in the scene around her. The auction that she had once viewed as the end of her family's legacy had instead become the beginning of something new, a transformation not just of her farm, but of an entire community's understanding of what was possible. The billionaire who had attended a struggling farmers' auction had indeed changed everything, not through charity or philanthropy, but by offering a vision and the tools to make it reality. The rest had been up to the farmers themselves, working together to forge their own future. From desperate crisis to cooperative strength, from isolated struggle to community resilience, the journey had been remarkable. And as Sarah watched the next generation of farmers enthusiastically embracing both their heritage and new possibilities, she knew that the true harvest of the past year couldn't be measured in bushels or dollars, but in hope restored and a legacy renewed. The land would remain in caring hands for generations to come, and in the end, that had been all that really mattered. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass. These up, just click and check them out.